So I basically wanted to talk about like how we at Uber see kind of the future of mobility, what trends we're seeing, which role companies like us can play, and specifically talk about the role of electric mobility in that vision of the future. So if we go to the next page, I just wanted to start out by kind of talking about mobility today and how we kind of see some of the challenges. And this is probably obvious to everyone here today, but a large part of individual mobility, especially in Germany, but across the globe, is driven by individual car ownership. I mean, that had many advantages, created lots of opportunities, but frankly, it also creates lots of challenges. So one is obviously these cars aren't used a lot, right? If you look at countries like Germany, the cars sit idle around 95% of the time. So they're just used 5%, which means we actually have to dedicate a lot of space in our cities to storing these vehicles. In many cities, that's between 15 and 20% of the, let's say, capacity of area in the city to actually store vehicles, which is a challenge. And if we go to the next page, the other challenge is obviously not just what happens if we don't use the cars. The challenge is also what happens when we actually use them for the 5% of the day. We have lots of challenges around traffic congestion. People spend weeks a year in traffic going to and from work. We have a lot of pollution associated with that. And we just feel this is a big challenge, and we're trying to think through how we can use the technology that we have to solve or play a role in solving that. And if we go to the next page, there's a vision here, which I think is not new, but which is really enabled through technology, which is getting people from just using their own car to relying on different modes of transportation. And that could be public transport, this could be using bicycles, e-scooters, all the new stuff you're seeing. And we believe you have to make this seamless, affordable, and easy to use. Otherwise, people will never get rid of old habits, which is taking their own car and drive to work, driving to the city every day. And on the next page, I've kind of illustrated how that works with Uber. So on the right side, you can see kind of a version of our app where we already do that today. So you tell us where you want to go, and we will sell you mobility using different kinds of transportation. So could be that we'll tell you, hey, take an electric car to a train station, then we know when the train is coming, and for the last mile home, we'll get you a car with a driver to drive you home. So that's reality today. And then the vision, which is kind of illustrated on the left side, is, hey, we can take this much further. Obviously, autonomous vehicles will play a big role in that, and we are working towards that end. And then further down the road, there's lots of, let's say, a virtual takeoff and landing, this air taxi or flying taxi people talk about. This will be also a reality in some cities at least. So this is really the vision where we're trying to take this. And then I wanted to highlight a few things where technology comes into play to really make this better. And one example, which I'm showing on the next page, is around pooling, which we believe is one thing that's really gaining traction around the world, which basically means if you want to get from A to B and you use the Uber app, we will recommend to you to actually share the car with other people. And sounds easy, but actually to do it well is pretty difficult. And the things we're doing, and you can see that also in the screenshot of the app on the right side, we'll tell people, hey, like if you're willing to, let's say, drive 2 minutes more, we can offer you the trip that much cheaper. And depending on where you are, when you order a ride, we'll also tell you that you should maybe walk to the next corner to be picked up, because this will make it much more efficient for everybody who's sharing the car with you. Just think about, a one-way street you're in Manhattan, there's a one-way street. The driver would actually have to go around a lot of corners to actually pick you up. But if you just go to the next corner, we'll be able to do that much faster. And that's where we use artificial intelligence, real life traffic information to just make it more efficient. And that results in lower prices, higher utilization for drivers, less traffic on the city. So I think a great example where we can use tech to get people around in the city using cars, but actually using fewer cars than we would otherwise need. Another great example, which is on the next page, is also the information we're providing to drivers. So we're using a lot of demand forecasting to tell drivers based on specific patterns that we're seeing that actually there will be a lot of demand for a ride in a specific part of town at a specific part of the day. I mean, the obvious examples are like in Germany, Saturday 3:30, Bundesliga is ongoing, and there's kind of clear that at the stadium somebody will need to be picked up in 2 hours. But there's obviously tons of smaller events that are tougher to forecast where we can use machine learning. So that's, I think, everything I want to talk about with regarding like tech we use to make the cars more efficient, make transportation more efficient. But now I wanted to really talk about how we can electrify the cars that we have, because one thing is obviously make it efficient, use less cars, push people to use other options, but there will always be cars on the road, and our vision is to make them electric. And I wanted to share a few thoughts on what we see there, what is the traction we're seeing, and what's important to us. So if we move on, maybe 2 pages, we can skip this one, which is just a bit of advertisement that Uber is kind of a big company. So we really have this vision of electrifying the entire fleet that we're working with. And a great example, which is fairly recent, is on the next page regarding London, where we, if we can go to the next page, please. Thanks. So just one example, and we have similar ones across Europe, actually in the US. So in London, we made a commitment to be fully electric by 2025, which means any car that you will order on the Uber platform will be an electric car. Already today, there's around 1,400 electric cars driving on our platform in London. We actually created a clean air fund where we take a small fee for each trip to raise money to invest into partners that want to get an electric car. We've already collected more than 100 million pounds for that. We've invested 5 million in charging infrastructure and created a few partnerships with the likes of BP, Nissan, etc. So just one example where we're really leaning in, putting money behind that intention to really drive electrification. And why we're doing this is actually on the next page, where we believe companies like Uber can be leading some of that early adoption of electric cars. And let me walk you through this kind of virtuous cycle or flywheel that we use for that. And at the center of it, you can see like just increased battery electric vehicle use among drivers that drive a high mileage. And that's typically on the Uber platform, especially in Europe. A lot of the drivers are professional drivers, so they drive a lot of miles on their cars. And what we believe is, and that's shown here, if we have a lot of these guys using electric cars, this will lead to high utilization of charging points, which will make it a better return on investment for the companies investing in them. This will lead to a faster rollout of charging points, which will make it more easy to have a battery electric car, which makes them cheaper in the end, and so on. And we really think this is going to be a virtuous cycle, and it can be kickstarted to some extent by professional drivers in metropolitan areas that use electric cars first. And we really believe, and that's on the next page, that it's about the drivers, and there's a psychological aspect to it. And on the left side, you can see a study that we've done. We've asked drivers on the Uber platform if they would be interested or willing to get an electric car. And we've compared that with data from just the general population around willingness to adopt electric cars. And what we're seeing is that people who are professional drivers and drive on the Uber platform actually are way more open to electric cars for obvious reasons. Maintenance is much cheaper. You don't have to pay for gas. So if you actually drive a lot, it makes a ton of sense. And that's why we believe drivers on Uber will be among the early adopters. But obviously, it's not all that easy, and we aren't quite yet where we want to be. And one of the challenges is what I'm showing on the next page is just the economics of working with electric cars. If we can go to the next page, please. Thanks. So just think about if you're a professional driver, a big thing for you in terms of your economics and what determines how much money you can make is just the time you're actually sitting behind the wheel making money and not having to wait for anything. And what we're showing here is basically different scenarios. And it starts at the top where it's a scenario where you have a long range battery electric vehicle. So let's say 400 kilometers, 350 kilometers and above, where you don't have to charge during a full days of working as a driver. And we assume in the top scenario that you also have overnight charging, means you can charge at home or at your place of business where your car is. And as we go down, the second scenario is having a shorter range battery electric vehicle. So you actually need to charge once during the day. And as we go down, there's only, let's say you don't have overnight charging. And the last version is just you don't have overnight charging and you have a battery electric vehicle that doesn't actually have the range to go a full day. And all this actually shows you is that it gets a lot less attractive for a professional driver if you have to charge during a full day and if you can't charge at home. And that's illustrated by the purple areas of like a typical driver's day, which in certain cases, and that's what we see today, is going to be interrupted by charging times if your car doesn't have the range and if the charging infrastructure isn't right. And that's really what's deterring people from buying electric cars today as it relates to professional drivers in ride-hailing, taxis, and the sort of application. So really crucial to have the right car and the right charging infrastructure. And as it relates to charging infrastructure, we're actually doing some pretty interesting work. And here, this is an example from London, where we map out all the little red and black dots are actually charging stations, chargers today in London. And we map that with where drivers on the Uber platform are driving, where they would actually need to charge, depending on their behavior. And this is actually something we provide to policymakers, to companies that invest in infrastructure. And also we use that for ourselves to make investment decisions. And what you can see here, it's like the city is broken up into a lot of these small hexagons. And if it's like dark blue or light blue, it basically means there's a big gap. We need a lot more charging infrastructure because that's an area where there's lots of demand. People are driving a lot and drivers would actually need charging infrastructure here. And we believe this is a great way to use the data that we have to inform cities, municipalities, and other companies in making their investment decisions around electric cars. And then the last page I have, and then I'm looking forward to getting a discussion started, is something which is, I think, quite obvious, but for us, just again, important to illustrate that, yes, we're willing to invest, but we need other things to go right as well in order for that transition to 100% electric vehicles in the cities to come through. So what we're basically saying is if there's no supportive policies, even by 2030, and that's this gray area, kind of the worst case scenario, we still don't think we're going to get to full adoption. And the other scenarios are basically, if there's more charging available, we can move up the timeline. If affordable electric cars are available a bit earlier, either by manufacturers just getting cheaper or by subsidies, we can move up the timeline. And lastly, if governments heavily subsidize it, we can even do it faster. And that's what we're seeing in London, for example, where there's lots of policies in place. And all we're trying to say here is we're willing to invest and we're really keen to make it a reality. But I think other things need to happen as well. And we're willing to do our fair share, but definitely keen to get support from the industry and politicians as well. So that's it from my end. Just wanted to give you a quick highlight, a quick rundown on things we're doing as it relates to electric cars, and keen to get any questions and start a discussion with you.
Thank you so much. And I can tell already our audience is keen to start the discussion with you as well. We do have questions for you. Maybe you just start with the first one.
Yes, of course. Of course, it's the pandemic one subject for us or for our visitors. And one question is, from your perspective, what is the impact of the pandemic on the development of mobility in urban cities?
Yeah, great question, and definitely something that's top of mind for us as well. So what we've seen with the pandemic, that it had huge impact on our business and mobility as a whole. So we've seen massive drops around the globe. Let's say in the first wave, we in Germany, for example, but that's similar in other markets, we've seen a drop from 50 to 80% in demand. So like huge impact. We've also seen pretty swift recovery after a lockdown ended. So we are quite bullish on the ability of that demand to recover in principle. The other question is, will there be any structural changes to the way people get around? So I've talked about this move from using your own car to using a mix of other options. And I think one risk that I'm seeing is that people won't feel as safe in other options. We see that as it relates to public transportation already, and that this pandemic will halt a bit that movement away from your own car to kind of other mobility options. And that's why I think we have to collectively, as let's say alternatives to the privately owned car, invest in safety and also take those concerns seriously. Because otherwise, I think there's a real risk of things being set back by a few years. So I see positive signals. We're investing a lot in safety. All the cars have in-car partitionings. Drivers wear masks. We actually use virtual facial recognition to test that they have a mask on, etc. So you can do a lot, and it will need that kind of effort to make people feel comfortable using those kinds of transportations again.
We have another question, and I think you already answered it in a way, but I would like to ask you, what kind of interaction is required to achieve climate-friendly mobility in cities?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things, right? One is we have to reduce just traffic, especially with individual cars a lot to make it better. And stuff we have to do here is just have good alternatives. So public transport needs to be more attractive, easier to use, safer in some instances. And also all these new mobility services like Uber, like car sharing, ride hailing, scooters, etc., need to be seamlessly integrated, right? So it needs to be easy for someone to actually use that stuff, and not just for somebody who's 25 who has an iPhone and knows that stuff since he's 16, but also for people who are older and have a harder time tapping into that kind of mobility. So we need to make that better. And then the other point is around electrification, as I said earlier. For the rest that's still there, which is going to be mobility by a car, we have to electrify as fast as possible. And there's lots of challenges around charging infrastructure, etc., some of which I mentioned. But those are the two things we have to work on, right? We have to build up attractive alternatives and then electrify the remaining cars on the road. And that will go pretty far towards solving these challenges.
It is a pretty tough decision to leave the freedom of your individual, your personal car behind. Maybe you can help all of those who are still not in the position to make this decision by just naming 3 main points that will help us to just try to use Uber and similar offers out there.
I mean, so I like a car as much as the next guy. And I mean, I'm currently in Munich. Like if there's a nice day and I'm driving to the mountains on the weekend, I can see how that's freedom and how that's actually also fun. I would say if I drive through Munich to work on a Monday morning, I have a harder time seeing how that is so much fun. So for me, it's really about the use cases, right? And I think if people really take that plunge, it actually changes a lot. And for me, it was the same like 5 years ago when I started at Uber. I sold my car, and all of a sudden I realized how much liberty is actually behind not owning a car, not having to park it every night, not having to pay for it, and it gets quite expensive, as you know, and just use what's already there. And I think a lot of people would be surprised at how convenient it is already to use alternatives and how much there is, especially in urban cities. We have to get much better in rural areas, and that's a whole different conversation. But I would just say people should give it a try. You don't have to sell your car, but just try out what's there. And we see young people already doing that, and that's a shift that's coming anyways. And we all collectively as an industry need to prepare for that anyways.
That was an awesome question, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it is true. Having your own car just asks of some attention, some money, some wondering about it. So yeah, maybe we can make some of our viewers here maybe we can just have them to try the alternatives.
We have another question, or which I would like to ask is, it's coming from the audience. Does Uber, how do you say, Uber or Uber?
We usually say Uber, so
Okay,
this is correct, yeah.
So does Uber support drivers with electric cars?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something we thought a lot about, and I think basically the answer is yes. Right, so we see drivers are open to the concept, as I said, especially professional drivers who drive a lot of miles, and it gets a lot cheaper if you don't have to change the oil and change other parts in the engine all the time. But especially the initial purchase is one that is kind of a big deal. So two things that we have. First of all, we have partnerships with car makers like Nissan, for example, but in Germany also we have a partnership with Volkswagen where they offer their electric cars to our drivers at a preferred rate. And that makes it easier. But also we have kind of an investment put behind that. And the example I shared earlier from London is that we already put aside more than £100 million into that. So drivers can tap into that to finance part of the electric car. And that's something that we put into that we offer to them in order to help them make the decision. And I think we need to do that if we want to accelerate the change, and that's why we've done it.